I've never been one to believe in ghosts or any supernatural phenomena. I have always believed that such stories are just fictions in order to scare impressionable people. But that night in the old forgotten mansion turned my idea of reality upside down. If someone had told me this before, I would have laughed and said that they had watched too many horror movies. But what happened to me made me doubt everything. The mansion stood on the outskirts of the city, abandoned, dilapidated, with cracked walls and an overgrown garden. No one knew who it belonged to. Few people were interested in it. It has been avoided for a long time, especially after a few years ago. Local children who sneaked there at night returned scared and refused to talk about what they saw. At the time, it seemed like just childish horror story. But curiosity is a terrible thing, and it led me to decide to spend one night in this house. It always seemed to me that I could control my fear. I convinced myself that it would just be an interesting adventure, an opportunity to test my nerves. Self-confidence was my main mistake. I arrived at the mansion late at night. The sun had already disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind only a dim reflection on the gloomy clouds, and the air was thick and heavy, as before a thunderstorm. When I got out of the car, the silence around me was deafening. There were no sounds, no signs of life, just the creaking of an old iron fence, swayed by a weak wind. The fence was covered with rust and sagged in some places, as if no one had cared about its condition for many years. I pushed the gate open, and it gave way with a dull creak. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the fence, a chill ran down my spine. It seemed like there was something lurking around every corner, ready to pounce on me. I put it down to my fantasy. Night walks often provoke the imagination to all sorts of fears. But this feeling did not go away. The closer I got to the house, the stronger this feeling became. The mansion towered in front of me like a dark hulk. Its windows were black empty socket, and the walls were cracked and moldy. It seemed that he was alive, that he was watching my every move. I took a flashlight out of my backpack and shone its beam at the front door. The door was massive, made of heavy oak, but its hinges had long since rusted through, and it was askew as if it was about to fall. I took hold of the cold metal handle and, overcoming internal resistance, pushed it. The door opened with a soft groan, and a dark, dusty corridor opened in front of me. The smell of damp and old age hit the nose, as if the mansion had been soaked in this rotten atmosphere for centuries. First thing I noticed when I went inside was the absolute silence. There was no sound except for my footsteps, which echoed in the empty halls. I walked forward along the corridor, passing old, half-crumbled paintings on the walls. Some of them were too faded to make out what they depicted, but the rest were scenes from the past, when the mansion might have been full of life. Now everything here seemed dead, and the thought haunted me. When I entered the first room, I came across old, dusty furniture. Everything here was covered with a thick layer of dust, as if no human had set foot in this house for many years. There were yellowed newspapers on the table, and I took one of them to look at the date. The newspaper was launched in 1973. The article on the front page reported some kind of incident related to the disappearance of local residents, but its text was blurred and difficult to distinguish. After examining the room, I headed further into the mansion. Turn by turn, staircase by staircase, this house was a real maze. At some point, I realized that I was lost. The corridors here were too much the same. The rooms seemed similar to each other. The old wood of the floorboards creaked underfoot, and every step echoed in my ears. I came across another door and pushed it open, and found myself in a large living room. It looked like someone had suddenly left the room, leaving everything in its place. There was a carpet on the floor, on which there were traces of something dark, possibly spilled wine. The old piano in the corner of the room was covered in dust, but its lid was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently tried to play it. I got closer and noticed that the keys were worn, but still in place. Suddenly I heard a strange sound, quiet, barely perceptible. It came from the back of the house. It was something like a faint rustle, as if someone was moving on another floor. I froze, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, but it quickly stopped. An inner voice kept telling me to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go upstairs to check what it could be. The stairs creaked under my weight. Each step seemed louder than it really was. As I climbed higher and higher, I felt as if the house was shrinking around me. When I reached the top floor, I felt something cool touch my face. There was a draft in this house, although the windows were closed. I walked down a long corridor and entered one of the rooms. It was a bedroom. The huge bed stood in the center, its bedspread was torn, and pillows were scattered on the floor. There was a mirror on the wall, old and darkened with age. I went up to him and saw my reflection, but there was something wrong with that reflection. I leaned closer, and at that moment, the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. I turned around. There was no one there. Adrenaline surged through me, and I rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried to open it, but it seemed to be stuck to the jamb. Suddenly, I heard someone laughing softly. It was an unnatural, creepy laugh coming from right outside the door. My heart stopped. I realized that something was wrong here. This laughter gradually turned into a wheeze, and I realized that I was trapped. In desperation, I looked at the window, hoping that I could open it and get out. But it was tightly closed, and attempts to open it were useless. I rushed to the door again, and at that moment the laughter suddenly stopped. There was silence, but there was something menacing in it, as if the house was hiding in anticipation of something. I hit the door in a panic, flew open with a bang. I ran out into the hallway and headed for the stairs, feeling that I had to leave this damn house immediately. I ran out into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest so hard that it seemed to drown out everything around me. My footsteps echoed hollowly, and each new sound only added to the sharpness of my fear. I was on the edge, beyond understanding what was going on. This house seemed to come to life. He was playing with me, driving me deeper into the trap. With every step I took, I felt a growing heaviness in the air, as if the walls were shrinking, turning the corridor into a narrow, stuffy tunnel. When I finally reached the stairs, a sudden attack of dizziness forced me to stop. My head was spinning, and I gripped the railing tightly, trying to keep my balance. Down in the depths of the mansion, the darkness seemed tangible, ready to swallow me up. For a moment, I thought it might just be a nightmare I was about to wake up from. Every sensation was too real, too explicit. I went down the stairs, barely moving my legs. The dust rising from under my shoes hung in the air, settling on my face and clothes. I could feel it clogging my nose, causing a choking attack. His lips were dry, and his breathing became ragged. Every cell in my body screamed that I had to run. My legs were giving way, and my mind was covered with a veil of panic. As soon as I reached the first floor, the same dark figure that I had seen earlier flashed before my eyes again. She moved slowly, as if studying me. I froze in place, my eyes widened in horror, and I realized that I had neither the strength nor the will to resist it. Unable to stand the strain any longer, I tore away, not even realizing where my feet were going. I rushed towards the kitchen, hoping to find at least some way out, but there was only desolation. It looked as if the inhabitants of this house had left in a hurry. The kitchen cupboards were open, and the remains of long-spoiled food were visible inside, covered with mold and rot. One of the pots on the stove was tilted, and a frozen mass of some once liquid dish flowed out of it. The table was strewn with fragments of broken dishes, and in the center of it stood an old cup with what looked like long-dried tea. An unbearable nausea seized me. The smell of rot and decay was so thick that it could have been cut with a knife. I understood that the people who lived here had left this house a long time ago and probably in a hurry. But why? What could have made them leave, leaving everything in such chaos? Did they also encounter what was haunting me now? There was no way out, so I went back into the hallway. My skin was covered in sweat, and I could feel cold, sticky moisture running down my back. Shadows flickered in the darkness of the corridor, and every time I looked back, it seemed to me that someone was following me, quietly treading on the old wooden floors. At that moment, I heard another sound. Faint, barely perceptible whisper. He was coming from the back of the house, from one of the rooms that I had not yet had time to explore. That whisper was full of pain, despair, and something indescribable that made me shudder. I felt something squeeze my chest, making it difficult to breathe. Unable to endure this torment any longer, I moved back to the exit. I was sure that the house was now in control of my actions. Every turn, every step was given with incredible difficulty, as if the air was thickening and preventing me from moving. When I reached the door, which seemed to be the only escape, my hand was shaking as I reached for the handle. But the door wouldn't open. It was locked, as if someone or something didn't want me to come out. I tried my best, but the lock wouldn't budge. I was in despair. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I realized that I had fallen into a trap from which there was no way out. The mansion had shut me in, and now I was part of its dark history. The days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time. I lived in this house, existed rather than lived, trying to somehow survive. I didn't know how long I could take it. There was almost no food left, and I ate what I found in old cupboards. Dry crumbs, spoiled canned food, which only miraculously did not poison me. The water I collected from the rare drops oozing from old pipes was cloudy and had a metallic taste. The weeks in this house were an endless nightmare. Time had lost all meaning, and I couldn't tell if it was morning or night. The windows let in only a faint, dim light, which brought no comfort. The darkness surrounded me constantly, soaking into my skin, permeating my thoughts. This house, which had once been majestic, was now my only world. And this world was slowly killing me. Every day I fought for survival, but my strength was rapidly fading. The constant feeling of hunger turned into a dull ache that I could no longer ignore. There was almost no food left, and what I could find was becoming less and less edible. I started eating everything I could find: dry pieces of bread, moldy crumbs, even what would have seemed inedible to me before. The hunger was unbearable, and I no longer thought about the taste or smell. I only thought about not dying. Water has become another problem. I collected it from rusty pipes, from drops running down the walls, from puddles that formed on the floor after the rain made its way through the leaking roof. Every sip was bitter and disgusting, but it was the only way to quench your thirst. It felt like with every sip my body was filled with something alien, as if the house was pouring its darkness into me. Sleep brought no relief. He was full of nightmares that didn't stop even when I woke up. In my dreams, I saw dark figures, heard whispers that became more distinct each time. These dreams were so real that when I woke up, I couldn't figure out if it was a dream or another game at home, in which I was now a prisoner. I was afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I would see and that I might not wake up. Sometimes, in moments of brief lull, I could feel the house watching me. It was not just a feeling, but the certainty that he knew everything about me. He was enjoying my suffering. I saw how the walls seemed to breathe, how the shadows in the corners of the room moved, changed shape. This house was alive. It was a consciousness that was playing with me, testing my strength, waiting for me to break. One day, wandering through the empty corridors in search of at least something that could help me, came across an old chest. It was locked, but with the last of my strength, I was able to pick the lock. Inside, I found old photographs, yellowed papers, books, long-lost treasures that once belonged to the owners of this house. In one of the photos, I saw a family: a man, a woman, and 2 children. They stood in front of this house, but their faces were erased, as if their existence had been erased from memory. I realized that these people might have been victims of the same horror that was consuming me now. Making my way further through the house, I found a diary. Its pages were covered with a trembling handwriting full of pain and despair. The notes talked about strange events taking place in the house, about shadows that did not belong to any living being, about voices calling at night. The last entries were sketchy, as if the author could no longer express his thoughts meaningfully. With each new word I read, I realized more and more. This house was cursed, that its walls contained something sinister, which feeds on the souls of those who dare to enter. The last entry in the diary was made in illegible handwriting. They took us away. I feel like we're disappearing. The house won't let go. We will become a part of it. These words caused a wave of horror in me. I felt the cold shackle my whole body as my mind refused to believe in what I was reading. But I knew it was true. I felt the house slowly but surely engulfing me. I could see my face turning pale, my body losing strength, my mind clouding over. This house was sucking the life out of me, turning me into another victim, one of the many who were trapped here. The nights were getting unbearable. I could hear the shadows moving around the house, talking quietly to each other. Sometimes I felt something warm touching my skin, as if someone was standing behind me, watching me. I didn't dare look around. I didn't dare breathe. The fear was so strong that I could barely move. I was getting weaker every day. My body was emaciated. My skin turned a deathly pale shade. My eyes sank, and my head throbbed with pain that did not subside for a moment. I knew that my end was coming soon. The house was slowly killing me, and I couldn't resist it anymore. But something inside me was bothering me. Faint, barely noticeable spark of hope still lingered in his soul. I couldn't let this place win. I couldn't become another nameless victim of this house. I had to find a way out while I still had the strength. And one day, when I had almost lost all hope, I came across a door that I hadn't noticed before. She was hidden behind a heavy curtain covered with dust and cobwebs. The door handle was cold to the touch, and when I took hold of it, I felt a current run through my veins. I knew this was the last chance. Gathering all that was left of my strength, I opened the door. It gave way easily, and I found myself in a narrow, dark corridor. I didn't know where it was going, but I didn't care. Any road was better than staying here. I walked forward into the darkness, feeling the house freeze around me with every step, as if realizing that I was trying to escape. Corridor led me to another staircase leading down. The stairs were fragile and creaked under my feet. I didn't stop. When I got down, I found myself in the basement. It was even darker here than in the rest of the house, and the air was heavy, suffocating. I felt for the light switch on the wall, but it didn't work. My hand came across something cold and metallic, and I realized that it was another door. I pushed it open, and it opened easily. There was another room behind it, but it was different from anything I had seen before. Floors were paved with stone, and the walls were decorated with strange, sinister symbols. In the center of the room stood an altar, on which lay rusty chains and long-extinguished candles. I realized that this place was the epicenter of all the evil happening in the house. But among all these ominous paraphernalia, I saw something that made me freeze. There was a huge symbol painted on the wall directly in front of me, shining with a dim, eerie light. This symbol attracted the eye, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. Suddenly, I felt something inside me respond to his call. I knew that this was the key to my salvation or to my ultimate demise. I took a step forward, feeling the cold breath of the house thicken around me. My heart was pounding. My mind was torn between fear and determination. I knew that by touching this symbol, I would either find a way out, or I would finally become a part of this place. I reached out and touched the symbol. At the same moment, something exploded inside my head. I heard a loud, deafening scream, and everything around me spun. The walls began to shrink. I felt myself being sucked into the darkness. But I didn't let go of the symbol. I knew I had to fight to the last. And then, in a last burst of desperate strength, I screamed, breaking the silence. And at that moment, I felt the darkness around me begin to dissipate. Everything I knew, everything I went through, everything became a fog. I collapsed into the void, not knowing what awaits me beyond. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in an empty, lighted room. All the darkness and horror I had experienced seemed like distant memories. I felt the light embrace me, and the air became clean and light. I was alive. I was free, but something inside me has changed. I knew that the house I had left behind was not just a building. It was a place where the darkest fears came to life. I was one of those who survived its horror. I was one of the few who managed to get out, but a part of me remained in that house, in those nights and in those shadows. And even though I was free, I knew that the darkness I had left behind would haunt me for the rest of my days.